Diary of a Wimpy Kid has an interesting place in the culture. The brainchild of artist and author Jeff Kinney, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is the saga of a 6th grade social outcast named Greg Heffley, whose heightened opinion of himself lands him in deeper and deeper trouble, first releasing on Funbrain from May 2004 to June 2005. I was a bit too young for Wimpy Kid's online debut, but I was just the right age for its physical publication on April 1st, 2007. I cannot overstate the whirlwind of hype that gripped our 4th grade class at that time. Everyone had to have their own copy, and the waitlist for the one copy our class bookshelf held stretched into the next year. Zooey Mama became a staple of our lexicon, we developed our own cheese touch game despite there being no identifiable patient zero, and each subsequent entry in the series was met with great excitement. And with good reason. For young readers, Diary of a Wimpy Kid was truly something else. From its unique hardcover binding that looked and felt like an actual diary, or journal, to its clever balance of prose and artwork, from its understated humor to its cynical, subversive storytelling, it's a wicked combination that appealed wonderfully to the elementary and middle school crowd. I collected the books up until number 5, The Ugly Truth, but after that I think I outgrew them and lost interest. The series has proceeded to release a new entry pretty much every year, with number 21 releasing this October, alongside a spin-off series, activity books, and movie diaries chronicling behind-the-scenes information about the film adaptations. But regardless of how the book quality has arguably shifted since the early entries, I mean, we also have to consider that I'm no longer a middle schooler. What's that you kids call me? Ultimate Night Custom? Your slang makes no sense. Anyway, I guess it can only be a good thing that kids that age have an ongoing book series that specifically appeals to them. Yet, despite not having as much impact as something like, say, SpongeBob, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, like many other properties, persists in meme culture. Alongside Zooey Mama, I also remember #NotMyRoderick. I still see the occasional good one Manny to this day, and, pivot! And of course, there's the fandom. But Diary of a Wimpy Kid, by its own design, has let its fandom run with it in ways you don't see much elsewhere. Diary of a Wimpy Kid's font, art, and writing style lends itself very well for appropriation. As mentioned before, its sense of understatement is enhanced by the contrast between its ludicrous narratives and its professionally amateurish presentation, and this simplicity is liberating for both writers and graphic designers, which is how fanfiction writers haven't just created their own stories, but built their own diaries. Well, sort of. On the Loaded Diaper subreddit, there are templates, guides, and assets for creating what the fandom calls LLBs, or looks like books. If only I'd known about this when I was 10. So, story time. Back when I was 10, I tried creating my own Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. I used line paper and cardboard. I tried my very best to imitate the font and the art style. This was before I knew that the characters were basically stuck in a constant time loop. They're going to stay their own ages and stay in their own grade levels for pretty much the end of time. So I postulated at what point in their lives the characters would be, and Greg was, I think, like a junior or a senior in high school. He was applying for college. And there was this one joke where Greg tried submitting a college application, but Manny was trying to practice writing his name, so he got a hold of Greg's submission form and tried writing on it, and thanks to that typo, his application got sent to some, like, military school in Romania or something. Needless to say, that LLB didn't really go anywhere. These LLBs, despite showing great understanding of the source material, are often shocking and edgy, sometimes in how the characters are logically transgressed, other times in just how absurdly drawn out and graphic the scenarios get. As you can imagine, the results vary wildly. There exist countless dramatic readings of Diary of a Wimpy Kid LLBs on YouTube, so for this video, I'd like to take a more analytical approach. We're going to look at a curated selection, what about them stands out, what works, what doesn't work, starting with what I believe is the gold standard of this particular medium. Diary of a Wimpy Kid, 25 years later. Premiering on the subreddit 8 years ago by user JugDeGrogs. I swear some of you make your usernames by slamming your keyboards. 25 years later promises exactly what the title conveys, speculating on the Wimpy Kid cast in the year 2032. Greg is a passive underachiever who works a dead-end office job. Manny cut and run for New York, abandoning his family. Roderick becomes the most well-rounded and wholesome Heffley, getting married and having a kid. Frank is diagnosed with terminal cancer, a trial which greatly taxes Susan. Raleigh Jefferson, meanwhile, finds fame and success as the writer of the popular newspaper comic Zooey Mama. What I like about this setup is how it achieves a balance of being both grounded and faithful. We've heard so many takes about how Greg Heffley is actually a sociopath, but his dominant trait in the books was laziness. So it makes sense that once he grew up, his lack of ambition and defeatist mentality would steer him down a path of mediocrity. He never got rich or famous, he never wound up a serial killer, he's just a normal, unimpressive guy, all a result of his own doing. Despite Roderick's characterization as a rebellious, troublemaking teenager in the books, readers even back then recognized that he was a clever and talented guy, and the most normal of the Heffleys. It makes sense therefore that he alone would find happiness. Manny just sucks. No comment there. And although Raleigh could be a coddled, clueless goofball, he was also a dedicated, driven friend, and considering Greg's status as an unreliable narrator, who knows what else Raleigh had going for him. The emotional crux of 25 years later is Greg's closeted bisexuality, which served as a point of contention between him and his father, and frames Frank's canonical efforts to man up his son in a much darker light. It also explains the falling out between him and Raleigh in their adult years, which gives context to this iconic image. I'm not gay, Greg. Frank's cancer recurrence draws the family back together in the story, which results in a healthy amount of Manny abuse. I like how it's never made clear what compelled Manny to abscond from New York, or why. It's just kind of baked into the cake that he's a piece of shit, cemented when he lights the recently deceased Frank's headstone on fire. What the fuck? Amid the family drama and Greg's limp attempts to rekindle with Raleigh, he's terminated from his job and evicted from his house because he, left for a week and didn't tell anyone. He sleeps with his coworker, Bryce Anderson, is told off for trying to weasel his way back into his job, gets surprisingly touching advice from Fregley in a homeless shelter about falling back on family. Yeah, that reminds me, Fregley is reimagined to be the victim of an abusive father, leaving him with a mother who couldn't afford therapy for him, explaining why he always acted out in middle school. Considering how canon Fregley is handled, this only seemed inevitable. But despite this, he betrays his mother's trust when she catches him unearthing his grandmother's diamond ring with the intent to pawn it off. This was set up in hard luck, apparently. I wouldn't know, I didn't read that far. Greg loses confidence in himself to talk to Roderick, realizes he's bungled every single one of his relationships and prospects by being a manipulative, apathetic loser, and concludes by ending his life. At least that's what the newspaper reports. In reality, Greg survives the attempt, albeit crippled and left in a wheelchair, reflecting on how the old Greg is technically dead, and that also means putting an end to writing in his journal. He resolves to fix his present and focus on his future, instead of belaboring the past, as a new day peaks in the horizon. This is, unironically, a great piece of fanfiction. It's edgy, but not try-hard. The Easter eggs and callbacks are present, but not obtrusive. And although ridiculous comical things happen in the story, they're not excessive, and they're tempered by adherence to the source material's writing and art style. For example, this image of Greg crying on the floor is envisioned with the word sob lingering above him, in line with the source material's tendency to name interjections rather than spell them out. You can totally believe this is what would happen if these characters found themselves in less fortunate straits 2.5 decades down the line, and you can totally believe this is how the Greg Heffley we know would interpret it. As far as dark, mature reimaginings of children's literature go, this one is exceptional, which makes the author's other LLB, Rich and Famous, all the more baffling. Rich and Famous is Jug de Grog's alternate retelling of the 25 years later timeline, where Greg achieves his goal of becoming a game developer. In fact, he's the CEO of Funbrain. Greg dons a goofy leather jacket and sunglasses throughout the entire fic, so that's how you know he's rich and famous. The story beats are almost the same. Frank is dying of cancer, Greg's bisexuality is invoked and targeted by Frank, Manny is still a piece of shit who gets punched, Greg has another pensive encounter with Fregley, Susan professes her dismay and disappointment at Greg, and he, again, falls off a building and winds up in a wheelchair. The one notable exception is Raleigh, who becomes a much more active participant in Greg's story, an unwitting wingman in his efforts to one-up his father, whom he nearly kills twice, and a more explicit victim of Greg's pettiness, as Greg threatens to sue him over allegedly stealing Zooey Mama years earlier, which remember started out as a joint effort between the two, for no reason other than he just wants the option in case something happens. In the end, as the two come to their zenith atop a building, and Greg confesses that he loves Raleigh, it's Raleigh who pushes Greg off the roof, sequestering him to a wheelchair, and the fic ends with Greg resolving that if he ever encounters Raleigh again, he'll kill him. And he's still wearing the goddamn sunglasses. On its surface, this fic reads like an experiment detailing if a lazy, unempathetic loser like Greg got lucky in life and decided to apply his more active vices. And this reflects in the content and voice. Greg is much more explicitly arrogant and sardonic, and the more dramatic and dynamic story results in an art style that diverts from what we expect. And this is why, in my opinion, the fic doesn't work nearly as well. The tone trades subtlety and passivity for a more vulgar, aggressive edginess, which isn't nearly as funny. The art style's deviations make the work more resemble a comic book, eschewing that aforementioned understated contrast that the writing and art initially did so well. The image of Greg in his silly outfit, his signature frown replaced with straightened, tight-lipped aloofness, is admittedly a highlight of the LLB, but the other differences in presentation result in a fanfiction that isn't technically bad, rather inferior to what the promise of a Wimpy Kid fanfic offers. If you haven't already guessed, fanworks that remain faithful to the source material and work within the constraints of its style and tone are the ones that interest me the most. To succeed at this shows both a profound understanding of the source material and versatility in writing skill that complements the original prose, yet also stands on its own. Perhaps the author wanted to try something different with Rich and Famous, and I can't blame him for that. But if something works the first time, there's usually a good reason. And you can't blame me for preferring to read another 25 years later than something like Rich and Famous. I should also note the same author released a page-long epilogue which serves as a conclusion to both fics. 75 years later takes place in 2082, a single entry by a dementia-ridden Greg Heffley, warmly recounting a visit from his new friend, a faceless man who claims that they knew each other back then and that he loved him too. Greg, of course, doesn't remember any of this, nor does he seem to dwell on it. And even though this fic is 1 page long, it still much better captures the tone of the original 25 years later for a bittersweet, definitive ending. But going back on topic, there's nothing wrong with enjoying fics that just tell absurd stories with characters we know. So, let's look at a few. Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Dark Web is a 3-part series created by Redditor John Was Never. See? A name that's actually made of discernible words. This isn't so hard. Albert Sandy, a character from the books notorious for telling tall tales at the lunch table, informs Greg of the existence of the Dark Web, where people can make tons of money for significantly high risks. Greg, naturally, decides to sell Manny for $15,000 and replaces him with Chirag Gupta, which goes unnoticed by his mother. Blinded by riches, he proceeds to set up a monetized livestream camera in Rowley's bedroom, who smokes for some reason, and also kidnaps and sells Fregley, and pays to have his crush, Holly Hills, forcibly delivered to his home. This finally compels him to realize that what he is doing is messed up, only for him to immediately forget about Holly, leaving her to be picked up by a garbage truck. Ironically, this is totally in character for Greg, his short-sighted selfishness barely overcoming his one-sided affection for Holly Hills. I can see it now. Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Down in the dumps. Anyway, on to part 2. Greg gets himself kidnapped by his dark web contact, James, who's revealed to be working for Albert Sandy. Wow, big fucking shock. Albert explains his dark web operation sells yogurt, drugs, and organs, the latter of which is to be supplied by Manny, much to Greg's delight. And mine. This LLB excels in, as mentioned before, tempering extreme absurdity with restrictive style. If these scenarios were written any more emphatically or depicted any more dynamically, it wouldn't work. But again, understatement and contrast are the secret ingredients in the Wimpy Kid formula. Greg running for his life after refusing Albert's offer to work for him and being caught by James shouldn't really be hilarious. But it is. For some reason, this is one of the funniest fucking visuals I've ever seen. Is it Greg's lame-ass attempt at hiding? Is it the underwhelming way he narrates his capture? Is it James's permanently vacant expression? The flat cadence of his decree? I can see you, Greg. If Greg were visibly nervous, James more determined in his face or posture, the overall tone any more panicked, it wouldn't be nearly as funny. That much I know. Greg eventually wins over James and they conspire to escape the facility and blow it up along with Albert, which segues into part 3. And yeah, I think at about this point the fic overstates its welcome. After Greg's brief stint trying to return to normalcy, Albert is revealed to be alive, having survived thanks to his amazing yogurt, which is probably a sexual euphemism. Rally is revealed to be in cahoots with the dark web denizens, and despite getting double amputated, Greg survives, gets robotic limbs, and the fic ends with yet another oversized the end. Although part 3 does give what I think is the second funniest fucking visual I've ever seen. Dark web is a good fic, even if things do get a bit silly and rushed near the end. Before that, it does offer that tonal balance these LLBs ought to have. Although I wouldn't call it the gold standard, it's still something you could look to for inspiration and reference. Which brings us to our final fic. A work that had potential to do either one of two things to me while reading. 1, put me on a watch list, or 2, kill me. And despite my best efforts, I am still alive. Something I can only deem the Sonic High School of Wimpy Kid LLBs. From Swaghawk42, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Greg's No Nut November. As you've probably already surmised, that premise with these characters gives us problems. At least Sonic High School aged up its characters. Is this illegal? Like, seriously, I'm having second thoughts. Manny's in this fic. Am I gonna get registered? Okay, so remember when I said that the Wimpy Kid universe is frozen in time, rendering its characters forever their ages? That is because they are eldritch beings made of pure energy with no concept of relativity, and that the forms we see in the books are the closest to what our human minds can comprehend. That's it. That's the canon explanation, and totally not a disclaimer for the FBI agent who's bugged my apartment.
One of these days, Mr. Press. One of these days.
Now that that's out of the way, let's begin. Oh great, author's notes. This LLB is extremely messed up, so much so it nearly got removed from r/loaded diaper, and I had to stop uploading it to Reddit to avoid being in trouble with the mods. Good lord! How bad does something have to be to make a Reddit mod squeamish? I'm afraid. I don't think even Hennessy can dull the pain. Oh my god. Oh my god. Abort! Abort! It's No Nuts November in the Heffley household, and the host is none other than Susan, who's offering an infinite nut pass to whoever can last the whole month. This is totally normal and well adjusted, especially when you consider that Susan actually incurs temptation on the rest of the family. Frank is eliminated on day 1 because he literally sleeps next to the woman running the contest. But it also might be because he's having an affair with Mrs. Jefferson. According to Manny. That little bastard and his narking. There's a brief incident at school where the class swimming unit starts and Greg sees Holly Hills and nearly loses control and— oh god. Oh for fuck's sake. You really made me look at his chicken drummy? Why'd you have to emphasize it with those little line thingies? Is this a psyop? Are you trying to implicate me in something? We already have a canon book called Hard Luck. I'm surprised the author didn't stoop that low. Believe it or not, no, actually believe it all the time, it gets worse. Manny loses the contest when a classmate of his forced him to finish with a vacuum cleaner.
And even then it'll be a miracle if we can save those testicles.
And then he shoots himself after leaving a note. Frick you, Megan, you I can't say that word. It's a slur. Only little kids can say it. I'm not of the proper demographic. I've got too much hair in the wrong places. The one good thing about this fanfiction is the continued trend of Manny abuse. It's difficult to talk about this fanfiction because it seems each following sentence is trying to top the last in how horrible it is. Like, you thought Manny shooting himself was bad? How about the pig losing No Nut November because it, quote, used Manny's corpse as a fleshlight or some shit? Still reeling from that? Have this lovely image. But none of that matters because Thanksgiving is coming up, and both Grandpa and Susan enjoy sabotaging the rest of the Heffley family. So Greg's really gotta watch his back. Or his front. Actually both, because everyone in this fic is a cum-stained ball of sickness. At Thanksgiving, Greg survives Susan's Viagra-spiked mashed potatoes and her striptease routine. I should note that this is what Greg refuses to draw, accusing the reader of needing mental help. But no one survives cousin Byron pulling out a gun and shooting up the entire family. I felt like I was in Vietnam again. How does Greg know what Vietnam is? Have you seen his moose report? Anyway, after Byron turns the Heffleys into Swiss cheese, Susan ramps up her efforts to force Greg to nut. She stabs Grandma to death after she disapproves of the contest and shows up in her stripper gear at Greg's school. How are these characters, the author of this fanfic, myself, and everyone watching this video not in prison yet? She then welds everyone in the house and walks around naked. Greg questions how he could possibly get turned on by her middle-aged raisin. Greg proceeds to frame this drastic turn of events as annoying. But what's even more annoying is Susan revealing herself to be notorious mass murderer and gay porn star Sammy Twitch Dick. It says, "I'm fucking done. I'm sitting here on a beautiful Saturday morning writing about how Susan Heffley is actually Sammy Twitch Dick. Just wrap it up, please, for the love of all things good." Okay. Whatever you say. Me. There's a chase sequence. Greg kills Sammy Twitch Dick and wins the contest, but succumbs to hypothermia in the process. The final image actually looks terrible and you should be ashamed of yourself. And they all lived happily ever after. The end. Well, at least it wasn't as long as Sonic High School. Despite how wretched and degenerate this fanfic was, it still manages to read like a Wimpy Kid LLB. The understatement, the tacky artwork, for the most part, it's all there. And it's all recognizable. And it's largely effective. There is an art to this. Something that makes these specific fan works stand out. And even if it is horrible, it's still kind of special. So all this begs the question, why do we do this? Why do we take these beloved, kid-friendly characters and put them in scenarios worthy of the most overzealous infernal tormentor? Well, because it's funny. But also there could be something a bit deeper going on. It's certainly cliched to derive humor from the take childhood icon and turn it dark and edgy route. Sometimes it works out better than you'd expect. Other times it's cynical trash profiting off expired copyright protections. And other times it's incomprehensible. But I think the enduring popularity of Wimpy Kid LLBs isn't just a testament to the dedicated fan base, but also to the source material. Diary of a Wimpy Kid isn't your typical kids series, in which one could expect good role models, clear-cut morals, and happy endings. The characters, all of them, are flawed. Good things happen to bad people, and vice versa. And sometimes the morals are deliberately vague, or even non-existent. It's an acknowledgement of reality that doesn't talk down to its young audience. It teaches them that life isn't always a storybook lesson with righteous winners and deserving losers. It reminds them that they've all known a Greg or a Roderick or a Raleigh in their lives. Or hell, sometimes warns them that they've been Greg or Roderick or Raleigh at some point in their lives. And this heaping dose of reality is filtered through simple doodles and childish font that I don't think is necessarily trying to appeal to children, but rather imitating a childish style to frame these truths in a way that's simple and accessible. It seems as though the series might be more mature than some give it credit for. And I think that translates more readily to the shocking depraved depths that some of these LLBs reach. And it also shows that these fanworks demonstrate not just an understanding of the source material, but also an appreciation of it. Taking something you love and corrupting it may seem like a strange way to pay tribute, but hey, that's just how people are. And that's life. Take care, everyone. I'll see you all next time.